Hello, my name is Russell Kohn. I'm with the Kohn Law Office in Oceanside, California. We handle exclusively personal injury cases. And a lot of people ask me whether or not they have a good personal injury case, and we're going to be talking about that today. Let's talk about whether or not you have a good case. If you've been injured in an accident, you might be wondering if you have a strong case. Well, as attorneys usually say, it depends. There are 8 factors in considering whether or not you have a strong personal injury claim. The first factor is liability, which is a breach of the duty to use reasonable care. Proving liability is the first and biggest hurdle in your case. This is especially true in smaller personal injury cases. Insurance companies have no fear whatsoever about rejecting claims in small cases in which there's some serious questions regarding liability. If the defendant's fault or responsibility is unclear, then so is your chance of achieving a favorable outcome in your case. The second factor is damages. Liability can be clear, but if there's no damages, then you have no case. Damages is the harm that was done to you in the accident, including your past and future medical bills, as well as your pain and suffering and out-of-pocket losses. The damages factor frequently cannot be fully assessed at your initial interview because the extent of your injuries is still unknown at the beginning of the case. However, even in the early stages of your case, you probably have some idea as to the potential severity of your injuries. Cases involving broken bones, which show on x-rays, are relatively easy. But soft tissue cases, such as neck and back strains, are more difficult because they don't easily show up on radiology like x-rays and MRIs. The third factor is the ability to pay. Does the defendant that we're going after have the ability to pay a judgment? If not, you and your attorney may invest a good deal of time, money, and effort and emotional energy in the case and never see a penny in return. Either some type of insurance must cover the incident or the defendant must have personal assets like property that could be sold to pay the judgment. The fourth factor in whether or not you have a good case is, will the jury like you? Will jurors empathize with your situation? Conversely, what kind of person is the defendant? Will the jury like the defendant and sympathize with the defendant? There are some bad defendants, such as drunk drivers, the tire squealer, or the bully. If the defendant is unlikable, your range goes up. But even more importantly, if the jury doesn't like you or doesn't believe you, then your settlement range goes down. The fifth factor in whether or not you have a good case is the witnesses. Your case is only as good as your evidence. And usually your evidence is only as good as your witnesses. If, for example, your only witness to support your liability is a relative or a friend, your case is weaker and may be considered biased than if you had several impartial witnesses. Your doctor might be a good witness to the medical part of your case. If the doctor involved has never testified or doesn't want to testify or cannot testify very well, this lowers your case settlement value. The sixth factor in whether or not you have a good case is how tight-fisted the defendant's insurance company is. As lawyers, we're familiar with which insurance companies are the most tight-fisted and will make ridiculous lowball offers on cases, where you're likely going to end up in litigation. Conversely, if the carrier is fair, and some of them are, then you can count on a higher settlement offer before litigation. The seventh factor we should talk about is how much time has passed since the incident that caused your injuries. As a general rule, the longer it takes to get a case to a jury, the less sympathetic the jurors will be. This is particularly true if you experienced pain or other symptoms for a limited time after the accident and you have fully recovered by the time of trial. Our eighth factor we should consider is how much damage there was to the vehicles involved if it's an automobile case. In many automobile cases, The actual damage to the automobile may be minimal. If there was only a bumper scratch or minor fender damage, then the jury will question the extent of the impact and therefore the extent of your physical injuries. On the other hand, if the car in which you were injured looks like an accordion, it'll be easier to convince a jury that you have sustained serious injuries. To recap, the primary factors determining whether you have a strong case are as follows. How clear is the defendant's liability? Will the insurance or defendant's assets cover your losses? Will a jury like you and your actions and dislike the defendant and his actions? Do persuasive and unbiased witnesses support your claim? Does the insurer have fair settlement practices? Will you be fully recovered by the time of trial? And in auto cases, how extensively and visibly was your car damaged?